That year, our company was in a bit of a change anyway. There had been quite a boost actually for us in business when there was COVID, but then going into 2023, the business really started to slow down sales-wise. I had not intended to sell the business, but this whole sales issue propelled me into looking for basically a partner that could help with the sales, help with that sales engine, bringing in those leads. It was almost like they kind of found us more than we found them. When you're committed to something and you've owned something and you've been running something for probably 13 years at that point, really becomes part of your identity. And that day-to-day, I loved my team. The idea of giving that up and not having that day-to-day contact was really overwhelming and kind of scary. It was like, what am I going to do? That's a really big question for anybody who's considering selling a company, is what do you want it to be after you sell it? Because you're going to lose all control. I'm not saying there aren't those businesses out there that sell for millions of dollars or even billions. Mine was not that. And I think most businesses aren't. And here's why.
Hi, and welcome to the Business Alchemy podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan, and today I've got with me my lovely wife, Beth. And we're going to change things up just a little bit today, as I'm actually going to interview Beth and ask her some questions about one of the transitions that she went through in the last year. Many of you may remember I stepped away from the agency that we had been running together in 2023 in order to pursue some new things. And Beth continued on valiantly and did an amazing job of things, but decided after about a year it would be time to sell, and the opportunity presented itself. But it was interesting because I wasn't that involved in that process. Obviously, I had stepped away and had moved on. So today I'm going to interview Beth and chat a little bit about that. Beth, would you want to kind of set the stage for us a little bit and kind of tell us what happened from the time that, we'd obviously built an agency, had grown it, we were thriving, been blessed beyond measure, things were great. But then I obviously decided it was time to step away, and thankfully the leadership team was supportive of that. Talk to me a little bit about, let's kind of set the stage for what happened at that point, because I know when I began that, I don't think this, at least that wasn't my understanding, your thought was to sell in the next year, but that is what you ended up doing. Talk to me a little bit about that, kind of set that stage for our viewers, if you would.
I would. So you had decided to go another way, which I fully encouraged, because really the business had kind of outgrown you in a way where it was just thriving on its own, and you really thrive yourself, I think, in a slightly smaller agency where you can make very quick decisions and you have a smaller team and that type of thing. And Valor Circle had really gotten much bigger than that. And so we had decided that it would be great for you to go out on your own and try something new. And you did. And although it was a little scary because, of course, you had been my partner in that for more than a decade, on the other hand, it was, exciting because I could really make all the decisions I wanted to make without having to consult you at all. So there was some freeness to that, if that's a word, that I felt. So I was really rather excited to move forward and make some changes. And that year, our company was in a bit of a change anyway. There had been quite a boost actually for us in business when there was COVID. But then going into 2023, the business really started to slow down sales-wise. I don't know all the answers of why that was, but it started to slow down. So being a sales manager was not something you really enjoyed doing, it made sense for you to step away and then me to build out the sales department in a different way. So I had big ideas and big plans, and we had a couple managers that were there day to day doing a lot of the day-to-day operations and management, and I oversaw that. And it was also just an opportunity for me to spread my wings as a CEO, and again, not really have anybody to be accountable to at all. And that was a really great thing. I was very excited about the opportunity.
Well, and I think, you certainly stepped into that solo role really well. I mean, you'd owned the company for years, obviously, and I know we'd had many discussions at that point in time about, who ran the company and who didn't, and you always won those discussions because ultimately, you had all the veto power there. And we did really well in our own lanes, me
Yes.
handling sales and marketing and you doing what you did, but I know when I stepped away, that left some vacancies there. I know that last year was a bit stressful for you. I could see that as you were going through things. Talk to me a little bit about the decision to sell and what that looked like. Tell the audience a little bit, as much as you can about, did you like list it with a broker? How did you decide to put the business up for sale, and kind
Right.
of how did that transpire?
Well, going back just a little bit, when you stepped away, as you said, we had our own lanes and our own duties, and so it wasn't like I hadn't been already overseeing the operations of the company. I
Correct.
had, but I was able to step more into a visionary role, which you had always been really the visionary of the company. Although both of us have strong entrepreneurial backgrounds and desires, my focus was always really the operational support, how to make a lot of your ideas come true. And I enjoyed that. I was good at that. I liked that. But I had ideas myself. And you and I had been butting heads just a little bit more before that transition, in me
We
wanting
had.
to really push some of my ideas. And you're just a strong personality. So, I always wanted to, and you had really good ideas. So it was great to just have an opportunity again to kind of run with the company and not have to basically explain myself. It's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I really, really liked that. So things had been going pretty well. We did a new website. We did some new services. The team was excited, but our sales just weren't there. And that was really what we were lacking and had been lacking for some time, is a steady sales engine. And so I had not intended to sell the business, but this whole sales issue propelled me into looking for basically a partner that could help with the sales, help with that sales engine, bringing in those leads. And then I knew we could execute them beautifully. So it was basically just finding someone then we could sell on the idea of selling us. And we had been part of a couple different groups. One in particular was other agencies, other marketing agencies. And through there, we had made a lot of great contacts. And it was almost like they kind of found us more than we found them. But we had kind of put out the word that I was looking for this partner. And then they just stepped right up, and they were really excited about the possibility of actually buying the company. And so I really had to think about that and decide if that was what I really wanted to do, because when you're committed to something and you've owned something and you've been running something for, it was like 13, almost probably 13 years at that point, really becomes part of your identity. And that day to day, I loved my team. I had great employees. They were all very talented. I'd worked very hard at building them up into leaders, and they were doing such a great job. I was a proud mama. And it was the idea of giving that up and not having that day to day contact was really overwhelming and kind of scary. It was like, well, what am I going to do? But as I started to think about it, I then got really excited, because you know what? I had a lot of other ideas of things that I wanted to do, that I wanted to try out, that I hadn't really ever had the opportunity to do, because I was so committed to Valorous Circle for so long, more than a decade. And so we started this exploration, and I actually had two different possibilities at the time. And actually, I think there might have even been a third. But then I had to start figuring out, what do I really want my company to look like after I sell it? And I think that that's a really big question for anybody who's considering selling a company is what do you want it to be after you sell it? Because you're going to lose all control. I mean, it's not yours. You've sold it to someone else. They now run it. And although that turned out to be a really good decision, I had to decide, do I want the company to retain its team? Do I want to sell it to someone I know is going to basically just, get rid of my team and then they're just going to keep the clients? I mean, there's different types of buyers that step forward that want to buy companies, and they all have their own unique purposes and intentions. And none of those intentions are necessarily wrong, but they need to align with what the seller wants for their baby, their company, moving forward. So I actually picked someone that was from a culture perspective. Their office culture was very similar to Valorous Circle. It was owned by three gentlemen that I thought had great integrity, similar values to mine, and they were really looking to taking my web design business, because we did marketing, web design, SEO, that type of thing, but it was all based on websites that would market our clients' products, not just beautiful websites. They were beautiful websites, but that there was this marketing aspect to it, and we had really kind of dug out this beautiful niche for ourselves. So I had this generator of websites, and we were really, I will pat myself on the back, we did a good job putting together SOPs and building, operations and processes. So this really moved smoothly, and I was able to remove myself from the day-to-day and let the managers I had trained really run it. So I had this wonderful website machine, so to speak, that were doing some great marketing work with those websites. And the gentleman that I sold it to, they actually wanted to use that entire generator and add it to their business. So it wasn't that they were going to assimilate the business, assimilate the sales. They weren't going to just, take the clients and ditch the rest. They wanted the entire asset, so to speak, the whole company. And that was a huge plus to me because, like I said, I had fabulous employees, and I didn't want them to be without a job. That was really important to me, that they were taken care of.
No, I remember listening to you going through that process. You mentioned you had a couple of suitors, shall we say, that were talking to you about that when you let it be known that you were open to that. I think a lot of us as business owners, we dream of that day in which maybe we can actually sell in that. Can you share a little bit about some of that process? I mean, was it as heady as we often think, with, huge dollar numbers being thrown at you and everybody feeling like you were, the bell at the ball and everybody wanted your hand, or is it somewhere in between? Can you describe that process a little bit? Because, in a way, that's really what you and I had decided we wanted it almost day one in the company, is that we wanted to sell at some point. Obviously, the path worked a little bit differently. But when you got to that point, when you're like, okay, this could happen, this could be a reality, what did that look like and feel like, and even how did that experience go?
I think it's a really important question, because I think that a lot of people, when they start a business, they have this dream, at least I know that you and I did, had this dream that someday this company was going to be really big and worth millions, and that we were going to be able to sell it and basically secure our future after that. Retirement, no problem. Go do what we want, no problem. Wasn't, this was the dream. And it really turns out quite a bit differently than that. I'm not saying there aren't those businesses out there that sell for millions of dollars or even billions. Mine was not that. And I think most businesses aren't. And here's why. We made a lot of money in a year, but we also had a lot of expenses in a year. And ultimately, the worth of your company has to do with your profit. And there's this acronym, EBITDA, EBITA, And it has to do with what your company's worth is. And it's figured out a little differently. You definitely, first of all, need to have an accountant or some sort of financial advisor help you evaluate your company. I think that's really key. But people will just, fly off. I know somebody, side story, that wanted to sell their business and they thought their business was worth $5 million. And it's like, your business doesn't even bring in $5 million in a year. How could it be worth that? And what it has to do with kind of their desire of what they wanted to make in order to walk away from that business. But with this EBITDA, you need to evaluate your company, and essentially, and this is a very kind of loose way to say this. This is very generalized. It's your profit minus your expenses, and then there's some other things they do that number too. But let's just say I'm making $1 million in a year, and that's revenue. Okay, that's not profit, that's revenue. My company brings in $1 million, but my expenses are $950,000. That means my profit is only $50,000. And what that means is that, and this is generalized, folks, so don't jump all over me if you're a financial person and say, oh, that's way off. Generalized, your company's worth $50,000 because that's how much somebody can make in that year off that company. Now, the larger your profit margin is, you can then do things like they'll multiply that score. So if I am making $1 million in a year, but I only have $100,000 in profits, that means $100,000 in expenses. That means my profit is $900,000 in that year. Jonathan, my math was right, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So a company with a profit margin of making $900,000 in a year is worth a whole lot more than a larger company making a smaller profit. So at that point, my score can be multiplied, and it's when your score is multiplied. So like, is it times 1, whatever your profit is? Is it times 2? Is it times 10? Is it times 50? The bigger your profit margin, you can raise that multiplier. And again, you need to get a professional to help you out with this and do an evaluation of your company. But you can just quickly look at whatever your profits are in a year, and you're going to have some idea of what the value of your company is. And the larger that profit margin, the more value your company has. And so we actually then went through that process. And when I say we, I mean the myself and then the gentleman that were interested in buying the company. They actually went through, and I gave them access to my books, which is something you need to expect. You're going to have to lay it out there. And they then went through and they did this assessment, and then they came back to me and said, okay, so this is approximately, they didn't give me an actual offer at that point, but this is approximately what I'm thinking that we would be able to offer you, the ballpark. Is it something even you're interested in? And I said, yes, it is something I'm interested in, because at that point, I'm like, wow, they want to keep the company as it is. They're not going to fire anybody. They're buying all the assets of my company. I can go off and do what I want, and, I'm going to have some money that came from this. And that was appealing enough to me, and you were doing well on your own. Mm-hmm. So it was like, wow, I can actually, live off this for a couple years, and I can just kind of decide what else I want to do. I don't need to worry about bringing in revenue or money into the family. So it was something that I decided that I did want to do, and we then went forward on that. Now, there are a couple other things that played into that factoring, and I don't remember every single one of them, but I'm sure you can ask Perplexity AI or Chat GPT to talk about, put a prompt in, tell me what factors go into what a business is worth. But one of them was, can the business run on its own without the leader there? And that was one that was a check. And that was a big one. So if the business really revolves around you and you cannot step away, your company's not going to be worth much, even based on whatever your profit is. Another one was basically the operational systems. Do you have the processes, the SOPs? Do you have those in place? And we had great training. We had lots of SOPs. That was part of just what I did as an operations person. And as the CEO, I wanted to make sure all that was in place. We had onboarding processes. We had all the pieces also of the puzzle to hand over. And so that was another check. One of them that we did not have, which was the biggest minus, was the lack of a sales engine, which ironically was why I was looking for partners in the first place. So that one really hurt me as far as the evaluation of the company. That was definitely a minus, but it really was the only minus. And then those factors tied in with what the profit of the company had been was definitely a huge part of coming up with that final price that then they could, that we could agree on. The actual closing of the business was not taxing, but we all had high expectations of how quickly it could be done. And this is where you really need to get a lawyer involved. So I strongly encourage people who are selling their business, don't just do it on your own. Don't do it on a handshake. Get a lawyer involved. Because one of the things that this company, these gentlemen wanted to do is they wanted it owner financed, which means they weren't going to give me the cash up front. Just here it is. This was something that they were going to pay out over time. And of course, there's a lot more risk for me in that. What if they, dump the company? What if they ruin it? What if they don't make any sales? There's just so many possibilities why they might not be able to continue to pay me. And then, of course, there's always the finance interest charge too, because if I'm not going to be able to get that amount that we agreed on the day that it sells, guess what? As you pay me over 2 or 3 years, that money's worth less 2 or 3 years down the line. And so I need some interest with that. But a lawyer helped out by giving me some ideas, but also by checking out and looking at the actual contract. And that contract ended up being a little bit longer than I think the CEO of the other company really wanted. But I really felt that I needed to be protected in case something went wrong, because there were so many things that could go wrong. I mean, I'm handing my baby over to these gentlemen, letting them take over, and they really haven't given me much of anything but a relatively speaking, small down payment. So it's a big deal to have a lawyer involved.
I think a lot of people assume, you talked about another business owner we know who, had this perception that their business was worth millions and millions of dollars when even they weren't, that their total revenue for a year didn't even equate to 20% of what they thought it was worth.
Right.
I think that's a common perception with business owners, is that, it's kind of like, I think we've seen this with yard sale stuff. Your stuff, when you want to go sell it on a yard sale, you think is worth a lot of money. But when you go to a yard sale to buy somebody else's stuff, you're like, well, that isn't worth very much. And I think we kind of do that same thing in business, that our business is, oh my gosh, this is our business. I mean, it is your baby, it is your child, and it's worth all this. When in reality, there's some standards out there, even better than there are at yard sales, that prove in many cases it's just not, the value isn't there as you thought. One of the other things I know that a lot of business owners have struggled with is that transparency. You mentioned that, when you go into this, you've kind of got to open up the kimono and say, look, here's all of your books are wide open at that point for, not for everybody, but for the people that are looking at it. And that needs to happen before you get an offer, if I remember from what you were saying, because of course they need to, I'm guessing there were some discussions about where revenue was and numbers and all that, but then they basically, I'm guessing, needed to go in and validate everything. Is that accurate before you got the final number?
Absolutely, because I can say how wonderful my company is, but this is also them on the line, and they need to validate all of that. So they needed to make sure that what I was saying was true. And not only did I have to open my books, but I actually brought in my top managers who were going to be staying on, and actually everybody on the team stayed on. And I had a team of, I don't know, I think it was like 10 to 12 people at that point, which was excellent. I was so excited that they all were going to stay on. And I've kept in touch, and they have stayed on, and everything's good. But I also had to make some guarantees for a period of time that those people who were in the trenches day to day were going to continue to work, moving forward, because it would be awful for those new buyers if they walked in and then the people who were doing the day to day left. So, you have to open up your books. You have to be transparent. You have to be willing to show them your processes. You have to be willing to introduce them to your managers. That all had to happen in order for them to feel comfortable that what I was saying was the truth. And then on top of that, there was a 3-month period after the sale had closed, after everything was going forward, where I had to stay on, and I had some accountability about revenue. So I had to be able to prove out over those 3 months that there was going to continue to be consistency, and that this all wasn't just going to go, the second I walked away. So and I hear that a lot. I think both you and I have heard of other agencies that have sold that, the owner, the previous owner, had to stay on as a worker, as an employee for a certain period of time. So I don't think that's unusual, but it's not all the roses and wine that I think we think it's going to be when you sell a business.
Well, I know I was surprised that you didn't go out and buy me like a brand new, truck at the moment you sold, or anything else, and yourself a new Mercedes. I mean, we didn't do any of that.
Why would I buy you one? I'll buy myself one.
You didn't do any of that. Well, I thought you'd have a lot of money, but
yeah, no, that wasn't the case.
You didn't do any of that. It's for our family, it was a blessing, and it worked out, and it provided options, and it was definitely in timing. But I think it is important to know that it doesn't always work out in that Cinderella type affair that you kind of assume it may in your mind when you're thinking about that. As you look back, it's been not quite a year for you since you sold. I'm guessing it kind of feels like, your kids when they move out, except that maybe you're not quite as ready for that business to move out as you are your kids sometimes when they get there. Talk to me about that transition. We'll kind of wrap up with that. How did that transition work for you, and what did it feel like to take this baby of yours that you'd been taking care of for, in your case, close to 15 years, and turn it over to somebody else?
Well, first of all, I definitely was deeply attached to this business. I did own it. I did run it. And although, I ran it side by side with you for many years, I was always responsible for the operations and the actual execution of the services. You were more the sales guy and the face of the company. You were the ones that people saw in the marketing videos and that type of thing. And although your ideas played into the company in a huge way, and we actually, you founded the company, and we started because we wanted you to be able to follow your aspirations. It really became something that I treasured, and that was mine, but emotionally it was just as much mine as yours as well. And when I then had put that extra effort in that last year, and I found that God was really leading me to sell, not just get a sales partner, that was very emotional for me. I'm going to say I'm really glad that it worked out the way that it did. I'm extremely happy with the path I'm on now and what I'm able to do now. It was a very large stress on me, but I'm so grateful for those years and years where it provided for our family. We had two salaries coming out of it. It provided revenue and freedom. And so a lot of the value in the company was in all of those years that we had it and what it afforded us to do then. So it wasn't just about what we got out of it at the end. And so I forgot your question. Oh yeah, about when we actually had to turn it over. Sorry, I started to get almost nostalgic. When I actually turned it over, first of all, I am not a highly emotional creature. It's not that I don't have emotions, but I don't show, deep emotions very often. But there was at least twice on company meetings, and my employees had never heard or seen me do this. I started crying right there, just tears. I was so proud of them. I was so proud of what we had together. And I grieved that I was going to lose this day-to-day interaction with these absolutely fabulous people that I had a very strong maternal feeling for. I had trained them, I had taught them, I had tried to lead them in a way that was as honorable and just with the most Christian positive values that I could. And they seemed grateful for that, and they were sad for me to go. And so the 3 months were a little tough. One, because it was emotional to start, but then it was also hard to see them not need me anymore. And yet that's what I had taught them to do, is not need me. But it's hard then when they don't need me. It's like, darn it, why don't they need me? Why aren't they calling me, And so that 3-month period, I was actually glad when it was done, because it was rather hard to be exposed to them on a regular basis. And really, I was grieving the loss of the company, but I was grieving the loss of their need for me. And so it was very emotional to walk away from the company. And I was actually glad to kind of close the door on it because I needed to stop grieving and move forward and look forward. I still have contact with several of the people on my team. And so I'm also grateful for that, just, on a friendly basis. I can actually be friends with the people that I worked with now, where when you're leading them, there's some emotional distancing because you're the leader, and you have to be there for them. The buck stops with you, right? So it was different when it was actually my company, where now I feel like, wow, these are friends. But there's a couple gentlemen on the team that I feel like are sons still, sons I don't hear from much anymore, but sons. So I have a lot of sons, my own sons, and then, I have these sons that came from work. And then there are a couple young ladies that I also talk to quite a bit. And so I'm happy for all of that. But overall, I'm just really grateful for the way it went.
Well, I so appreciate you sharing that. And again, it's interesting for me to hear, because I wasn't very much involved other than, as your spouse. But I mean, I was not involved in that at all. I was busy building, my business. So it's interesting to hear some of that and see you verbalize some of that. Any parting wisdom for those listeners of ours that are like, hey, I really want to sell my business and I want to do that can help them prepare for that in any way?
Yeah, I do have a couple things. One, hire people who know more about it than you. So have your company evaluated, and don't wait until you're ready to sell or you're desperate to sell or want to sell. Have your company evaluated earlier. If it's a future prospect that you might want to sell, get that financial valuation so you can start working towards that. That's, I think, is really helpful. Also, hire a lawyer, have a professional contract drawn up, and explore options. One other thing that I think is critical, there's a couple. One, make sure that you have worked yourself out of the business. Those things I talked about where there were check marks. It's not just about the profit you're making, but it's about the company itself. Are you responsible and need to be there day to day to make that company run? Well, then your company's not going to be worth as much. Do you have a sales strategy and a sales team and the sales generator? If you don't, your company's not going to be worth as much. On the contrary, if you do have these things, your company's going to be worth more. Do you have SOPs? Do you have a good operations? Is your team well trained? Do you have a good team? Those are all important aspects of the sale. So those are all really, really critical in going to sell the company. But one of the things I think is undervalued, I guess, or you don't think about as much, is your network connections. Because I found those people those beaus, so to speak, who were interested in possibly buying the company through different organizations that we were part of. So we had actually been in a couple different, agency masterminds and connected with some different companies and that type of thing to work together over the years. And it was through that pool that these people came to me, that I was able to look for that sales generation company that I was looking for, that turned out to be a prospective buyer. So I think it's important to create partnerships and be in groups that are like entrepreneurs or business owners. I think that will really help in your quest to find what you need when you're ready to sell.
Awesome advice. So I really appreciate that. I want to thank everybody for listening in today. This has been a little bit different where I've got to interview Beth. Maybe down the road she'll interview me at some point in time, but I really enjoyed the opportunity to go through and do this. And I want to encourage all of you, whether you're starting a business or you've had one for a while, look at options and be open to things that may be presented to you, because sometimes change is a good thing. So with that, we'll leave you. Have a great day. Thank you for watching and hanging out with us for the last bit, and we'll see you on the other side. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.